If you can answer it correctly, I'll grant you one request. The CEO, Ms. Nelson, whom I met during the final job interview, turned out to be my former classmate. Back in school, she had inexplicably disliked me. And now, she wasn't just planning to reject my application, she handed me an unreasonable entry test clearly meant to embarrass me. Her intentions were written all over her expression. She wanted to see me struggle. Only people who are better than me will be hired. But the moment I saw the test, I breezed through it, filling in the answers quickly. This is way too easy. I'm done already, I said, smiling at her stunned face. My name is Keith, and I'm 27 years old. I live in Sapporo, Hokkaido. I was born and raised here but moved away after graduating middle school for a personal reason and hadn't been back since. I moved to a small town far from Sapporo, where my mother's family lived. Hokkaido is vast, and the distance to any major city can feel daunting, no matter where you are. However, I managed to make friends and enjoy a fulfilling life in my new town. Now, 10 years later, I've returned to this city. The reason? Job hunting. But not as a fresh graduate. In fact, I've already worked for a company in Tokyo before. There, I was entrusted with various tasks even as a newcomer and led a fulfilling work life at first. But that all changed after my first year. One day, I suddenly received a call from my uncle back home. Keith, something terrible happened. Uncle Tom? It's been a while. What's wrong? Your mom. She slipped while shoveling snow. What? My mom? Is she okay? In snowy Hokkaido, accidents caused by snow shoveling are unfortunately common. I listened as my uncle explained the situation in detail, fearing the worst. Thankfully, it wasn't from roof shoveling, but while clearing snow in front of the house, she slipped. However, she hadn't managed to break her fall properly and ended up fracturing her leg. She also hit her head, so she's in the hospital for observation. Can you come back to check on her? Your dad's busy. And you know how he tends to overexert himself. I'll talk to my boss and see what I can do. Got it. I hung up, but honestly, I felt like I'd been handed a lifeline. You see, the company I worked for was a big name, but the working environment was terrible. During my first year, my boss had been supportive and approachable, but from my second year, their attitude shifted drastically. Overtime became routine, and weekend shifts were treated as a given. I was constantly sleep deprived, unable to think straight. Stress kept piling up, and both my physical and mental health were nearing their limits. So when my uncle called, I seized the chance to take leave and return to Hokkaido to check on my mom. Seeing her for the first time in ages, I was shocked at how frail she looked. But my mom also seemed to notice the drastic change in me compared to when I had first moved to Tokyo. When I told my mom I planned to quit my job and move back to Hokkaido, she nodded with a smile. I can see it in your face, Keith. You're always welcome to come back. Those words gave me the strength I needed to move forward. I used up the last of my vacation days and left my job within 2 weeks. While helping my mom recover from her leg injury, I also took the time to rest my own body and mind. Once I'd settled back into life in Hokkaido, I began my job search. I was looking for jobs in Hokkaido, not Tokyo, because I was worried that something might happen to my mother again. Another reason was that returning to that environment was something I couldn't handle in my current state. So I focused my job hunt in my hometown, Hokkaido. And after a 3-hour train ride, I returned to the city where I was born and raised for the first time in 10 years. Compared to Tokyo, it felt quieter, but it was far more developed and convenient than when I left. A large department store now stood in front of the station, and the nearby park had been replaced by an apartment complex. The arcade where I used to hang out had been turned into a family restaurant. As I made my way to the company for the interview, I couldn't help but stop at a familiar spot. It was my old middle school. Since it was a Saturday, only students participating in club activities were visible on the school grounds. This brings back memories. not much has changed here. I stopped in my tracks without thinking and found myself lost in memories of the past. To be honest, middle school wasn't a happy time for me. Moving to my mom's hometown after graduating felt like a relief. The reason? There was a girl in my class who used to harass me. Her name was Melissa. She was stunningly beautiful, with excellent grades to match. Not only was she the most attractive girl in the class, but she also won first place in the school's beauty contest, making her incredibly popular. For some reason, though, I became her target. Back then, I was still small for my age, shorter than most of the girls in class, and I guess that made me an easy mark. But beyond that, I had no idea why she fixated on me. One day, after school, I was borrowing a book in the library. "Are you studying properly? If your family is poor, you'd better try harder," she said, peeking over my shoulder and mocking me. Moreover, she always made sure to target me when I was alone. That unpleasant behavior continued even after the class was reorganized, and no matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't understand why. As I had no memory of doing anything to make her dislike me. So, there was a time when I decided to confront her and directly ask why she was doing such things. She frowned, stuck her tongue out, and said, "Because I don't like you," before walking away. Even with that rude gesture, her beauty was captivating. It was the kind of charm that made idol-like antics seem adorable, not annoying. Honestly, I might have even been a little mesmerized by her in that moment. Man, what an unpleasant memory. I need to focus on the interview. After graduation, I moved away and lost touch with her. She's probably forgotten all about me by now. Dwelling on the past won't help me move forward. I gave my cheek a light slap, shaking off the lingering thoughts, and made my way toward the company. Anyway, I made it to the final interview. I've got to give it my best. The company I was interviewing with was a well-known major firm in the city. It was rooted in the local community, making it an ideal choice for someone like me seeking a fresh start. In the waiting room, there were several other applicants in suits, likely also here for a mid-career opportunity. Everyone looked tense as they sat, waiting to be called. I adjusted my documents and straightened my tie, taking a deep breath while I waited for my name to be called. The final interview was said to be a one-on-one with the company's CEO, Ms. Nelson. Even though it's a regional area, she is the CEO who built a major corporation, so she must have a very sharp eye for talent. Thinking about that, I could feel sweat forming on my palms. After what felt like an eternity, a young female staff member opened the door and called out, "Keith." Finally, it was my turn. Nervously, I opened the door to the meeting room, and in the middle of the room sat a young woman with jet black hair. But the moment I saw her, I was so confused that I wondered if I had entered the wrong room. Without paying any attention to my reaction, she looked at me and said, "Please take a seat and wait," without even cracking a smile. "This is Ms. Nelson, the CEO of the company I hope to work for." I'd only seen her name before, but seeing her in person was a completely different experience. As I sat down, she raised her eyes from the documents she was reviewing, still expressionless. Looking at her up close, I could feel an uncomfortable sweat starting to form. "Let's start with your introduction." "Yes, my name is Keith. I'm the CEO of this company." "My name is Melissa Nelson." Yes, the company I had applied to was run by none other than Melissa, my former classmate. Of course, I had known that all along. The moment I entered the room, I was stunned. I knew she had always been attractive, but I hadn't expected her to have grown even more beautiful, leaving me momentarily frozen. Well, she probably didn't even remember me. Melissa was already famous for her beauty back in middle school. But I heard through the grapevine that she went on to attend the University of Tokyo after graduating high school. Apparently, she had even been crowned Miss Tokyo University and was featured in magazines as a stunning, accomplished student. But seeing her in person, I couldn't believe how much more stunning she had become. It made my heart race. She carried herself with such grace and authority that it was almost overwhelming. After a few seconds of silence, it was Melissa who broke the ice. It's been a while. How have you been, Keith? Yes, it really has. You don't have to be so formal. We're classmates, remember? Her expression had changed from earlier, and now she was smiling softly, a beautiful smile that I couldn't help but admire. No, this isn't the time to be thinking about that. It's the job interview. I straightened my posture, refocused, and looked at her with renewed determination. Don't mind me, you're still the CEO. Right, that's true. She looked at me as if she were evaluating my worth. Her gaze was so intimidating that I decided to stick with formal language for the rest of the conversation. If she was trying to catch me off guard, she might use it against me to claim I lacked professionalism. Boring. She muttered under her breath, but I didn't miss it. She definitely had something up her sleeve. That realization only made me more wary. Noticing my tension, she returned to her serious demeanor and continued the interview. All right, let's go over some things. I've reviewed your resume. Yes. It says here you went to Harvard. Is that true? Honestly, it sounds like a big lie. Are you really okay coming here with something like that? Even a grade schooler wouldn't write such an obvious falsehood. A lie? Yes, a lie. No matter how much you want the job, lying is unacceptable. No, it's true. I tried to respond with a polite smile, thinking she might be joking, but she didn't seem amused. She alternated between looking at me and my resume, clearly not convinced. Interesting. But you didn't attend high school, right? That's correct. I didn't go to high school. So, you skipped high school and went straight to Harvard? Sounds a bit too perfect, don't you think? But it's true. After finishing middle school, I moved, and I didn't attend high school in Japan afterward. When I hesitantly said that, she eagerly latched onto the topic. Why did you move after graduating middle school? Well, it was a reason I didn't even want to remember. As unpleasant memories came rushing back, I found myself struggling for words. There were a few reasons why our family left the city and moved to my mother's hometown. The main reason was my parents' diner. It wasn't a trendy city restaurant but rather a small family-owned diner serving home-style meals. Though it had a reputation for delicious food and a few loyal customers, even I could tell that the old, small building was falling apart. The choice came down to either renovating or demolishing it entirely. In the end, we decided to close and move out. The other reason was my health. I got sick. It's completely cured now, but at the time, I was dealing with stress-related health issues. The doctor advised us to move away from the source of the stress and live somewhere else. Oh, really? Yes. On top of that, my parents were running the diner. But it was so old that the discussion even went as far as whether to rebuild or tear it down. That little diner was a bit dated, wasn't it? Yes, and with my situation as well, our family decided to move to my mother's hometown. As I averted my gaze while explaining, she fell silent for a moment. The source of my stress, it was Melissa's relentless bullying. Eventually, my body started reacting whenever I tried to go to school, breaking out in hives all over. Could she have figured it out? Nervously, I glanced at her. But instead of looking remorseful, Melissa was grinning. Sickness, huh? Stress-related, you say? Could it have been because of me? If so, you must have really hated me. How could she smile so smugly at a time like this? I felt anger slowly boiling inside me. Yes, you were the cause. I blurted it out without thinking, but she said nothing. Why? Why did you keep throwing so many nasty remarks my way back then? It was something I had always wanted to ask. Why had she been so mean to me? Even now, as an adult, the question had lingered in my mind. If you hated me, you could have just ignored me. So why did you do those things? Well, please, just tell me. If it's because you hated me, I can accept that now. Why bother? No matter what you find out, it's not like we're ever going to like each other anyway. Isn't it better not to overthink it? What? Forgetting we were in the middle of an interview, I leaned forward in frustration, but Melissa didn't seem to care. If anything, she looked completely disinterested as she stared at my resume. So, Keith, you graduated from Harvard, huh? Yeah, I did. Alright, let's get back to the interview. As she looked up, her cheerful smile returned, replacing her earlier indifference. It wasn't just a regular smile, though I recognized this one. This was the expression she always made when she had thought of something mischievous. Back in middle school, she'd approach me with the same look every now and then. This is something I get everyone to do. Since you say your academic background is true, you should have no problem solving this, right? She handed me a sheet of paper. It was a test sheet, full of English questions. What is this? It doesn't mean much. Let's just call it an extra entrance test. A different test from the one I took before the interview? Frozen in disbelief, I hadn't expected to be handed another test at this stage. Melissa, however, looked thoroughly amused. What's wrong? Can't figure it out? Her expression practically screamed, I bet you have no clue. She had clearly prepared this test on purpose. There's no way even a small city company would use a completely English test for hiring. Oh, by the way, I can solve problems like this with no trouble. She went on to boast that the test was as difficult as the University of Tokyo entrance exam. In fact, she claimed she had pulled the questions directly from their exam. Melissa looked genuinely amused as she watched me silently staring at the test paper. She was obviously enjoying the sight of me supposedly struggling. Then, standing up from her seat, she leaned in and whispered, Well, for now, anyone who's not smarter than me won't get hired. She said this with a grin, clearly finding the whole thing entertaining. This was no job test. It was just her way of messing with me. Oh, by the way, if you're not interested in getting hired, maybe I could grant you a little reward instead? As a special favor, I'll do one thing you ask. That won't be necessary. I think I can meet your expectations. This is easy. When I looked straight at her and spoke, Melissa had a surprised expression on her face and said, Huh? This time, I responded to her with a smile of my own. These questions were so simple I didn't even need to think. I quickly began writing my answers on the paper. Melissa, meanwhile, watched in disbelief, clearly not expecting me to breeze through it. How? Like I said, Harvard is written on my resume. Are you telling me that's not a lie? No, seriously, which university did you actually attend? I didn't attend high school after graduating middle school. The stress back then had left me so drained I couldn't even muster the energy to go to school. Harvard. Harvard University in the United States. It's right there on my resume. Thinking she still didn't believe me, I let out a sigh. But this wasn't the first time someone thought my resume was a lie during an interview at another company. In fact, even my first boss at my previous job thought the same. When I was 16, I started with a Japanese correspondence high school. Then I took the high school equivalency exam and was accepted into Harvard. Unlike Japan, the American system allows for skipping grades. I understood why it sounded unbelievable, but it was the truth. So, that proves I'm capable, doesn't it? Whether it's Tokyo University or Harvard-level questions, I can solve them. Now, about that reward. Ignoring her trembling reaction, I exaggeratedly placed a hand on my chin, pretending to think. What is it? You said you'd grant me one request, right? In stark contrast to earlier, my serious expression made Melissa's smile fade away. She was clearly worried about what I might ask. But I had already decided from the start. Feeling a little sorry for her frustrated expression, I looked straight at Melissa and asked her directly. All right, I get it. What do you want? Alright, here's my question. Why did you always come after me in middle school? What did I ever do to you? You've been dodging the question with vague answers all this time, so it's about time you gave me a clear explanation. But once again, Melissa refused to answer. Even though we were in the middle of an interview, I could feel my frustration growing. Her constant teasing and harassment, for no clear reason, had ultimately driven me to the point where I couldn't even attend high school. As memories of those times flooded back, I found myself glaring at her unconsciously. How long did the silence stretch on? Melissa eventually broke it, her voice carrying a hint of irritation, though her slightly downcast demeanor was evident. Her long hair obscured her face as she stared at the floor, leaving her expression unreadable. This company has been managed by my mother, who worked tirelessly to maintain its performance, even through economic downturns. That's right, your mother's name is listed as the chairperson. Yes. You can't imagine how hard it was for her. She raised me while protecting her employees' livelihoods in a male-dominated world. And do you know what my father was doing during that time? Well, I had always been curious about that. On the company's website and in its materials, only the names of Mrs. Nelson and Melissa were mentioned. Even back in middle school, it was always her mother who showed up to school events. I'd never seen her father. But everyone has their own family circumstances. There are many single-parent households, and I never thought it was my place to judge or pry. While I struggled to find the right words, Melissa continued speaking. My father left when I was a child. He walked out on my mother and me. I see. But one day, I found out. My father had become the father of another family. As soon as I said that, she stood up from her seat with a loud bang. Then, glaring at me, she spoke. Keith. Do you understand? I'm talking about your father. What? My father? Your father is my biological father? Her words left me utterly bewildered, and she pressed on, her voice filled with emotion. I saw your family walking together before you started middle school. I can still picture it clearly. Hearing those unbelievable words, this time it was my turn to be shocked. Seeing my expression, she let out a scoffing laugh and continued. I wanted so badly to ask him why he abandoned us. But when I saw how happy he looked with you, I couldn't face him. I just went back home, feeling utterly miserable. Do you have any idea how it felt to see the smile that should have been meant for me directed at you instead? You stole the happiness that was supposed to be mine. As if I were her sworn enemy, she glared at me, clenching her teeth as she spoke. Her eyes were so sharp that I couldn't say a word in response. The father I knew didn't seem like someone who would irresponsibly abandon his children. And my mother had never mentioned anything like this. I stood there in silence, grappling with what she had said, while she continued, her voice shaking with anger. When we ended up in the same middle school, I hated seeing your face. Of course I said mean things to you. And now you're saying you got sick because of me? That's not fair. It all started with your father. After saying that, Melissa swept back her long hair and wiped away her tears. She had been holding them back all this time, but now they streamed down her face. If what she was saying was true, it would mean my father and Melissa's father were one and the same. Did my father really leave Melissa's family to be with my mother? I couldn't deny her words outright. After all, I wasn't biologically related to my father. When I was a child, my biological father had died in an accident. My mother had taken over the small diner he left behind, running it on her own. It was my current father who had stepped in to support her. At first, I was shy around him, but watching his unwavering devotion to my mother, I came to accept him as my dad. He's always been so kind. The silence that followed hung heavy between us, neither of us knowing what to say. Melissa was the first to break it. Why did you even come here? You knew I'd be here, didn't you? Coming to this interview means you want to work under me, right? Are you out of your mind? Her tears were gone now, but her eyes were still red as she stared at me with a blank expression. Do you actually want me to insult you again? Is that something you secretly enjoy? No, that's not it. Then why did you come here? With your qualifications, you could aim much higher, whether in Tokyo, America, or even Hokkaido. There are plenty of better companies out there. Actually, your mother helped save my family's diner. What? That makes no sense. It's true. My parents recently reopened the diner, and it's all thanks to your mother's help. I wanted to show my gratitude by contributing to her company. My parents had been debating for a long time whether to reopen the diner. During that time, my mother slipped on ice and was hospitalized. While we were at a loss, it was Melissa's mother who approached us with support. Honestly, I wasn't thrilled about the idea of working under someone who'd spent so much time insulting me. But I figured this was my chance to grow as a person. Grow? Don't make me laugh. You ran away from your problems. Yeah, I did run. But your mother chose to help us, regardless of the past. I don't know why she did it. But I want to accept that kindness without being shackled by old grudges. Holding on to hate and blaming you won't change anything. I'd forgotten this was supposed to be an interview as I stood up and passionately made my case. She must have believed me when I spoke honestly and assured her I wasn't lying. She looked visibly confused. And who could blame her? Learning that her mother had helped the family of someone she harbored so much resentment toward was hard to believe. What even is this? Why would my mother help the man who abandoned us? That doesn't make any sense. If you're going to lie, come up with something better. Then ask your mother. Melissa listened to my words but still seemed somewhat unconvinced. However, in this situation, even she would have to ask her mother if we were to make any progress. Fine. Just go already. With that, she motioned for me to leave. What was the point of the interview? It felt like the whole thing ended with nothing but a fight. One thing was clear, though, we were both left with unresolved feelings. After all, who's to say who was right? A few days later, back at my parents' house, I received a call from Melissa. She must have gotten my number from my resume. Honestly, I thought I'd failed the interview and had already started searching for other opportunities. I have something important to discuss. Come to the office again. I was surprised to hear directly from her instead of someone in HR, but I put on my suit and headed back to the city. When I arrived, the receptionist immediately directed me to the CEO's office. What on earth was I about to be told? If I had failed the interview, an email would have sufficed. Honestly, I was so nervous and restless that I couldn't calm down. A secretary escorted me to the door, and I knocked. "Come in," came her clear voice. When I entered, Melissa looked up from some documents. Her long hair was tied up, and her makeup was lighter than usual, giving her a more approachable appearance. As I stood there, slightly taken aback, she rose from her chair and walked over to me. Then, to my shock, she bowed deeply right in front of me. What? I stared at her in disbelief, but she remained bowed, silent. Not knowing what to do, I awkwardly asked her to raise her head. What's going on? Sorry, but I don't understand. I'm sorry. I'm really, truly sorry. Could you at least explain what you're apologizing for? She slowly straightened up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and began to speak. For all the things I said to you, and about your illness. I don't even know where to begin. Alright, take your time. Just tell me everything step by step. While trying to calm her down as she looked on the verge of tears, I asked her to explain the situation. After that, Melissa apparently asked her mother for more details about her father. And also about me. My mother told me everything. I had misunderstood all this time. My parents' divorce was amicable. The real reason was my grandfather. He never liked my father and constantly mistreated him because he was a son-in-law. Your grandfather? Yes, he was the one who drove my father out of the house. I see. Actually, my father told me the same thing. After the initial confrontation, I had asked my parents about what had happened. I told them everything I had heard from Melissa, including her perspective. My father listened quietly and then bowed his head deeply before explaining. What I learned was the story of Melissa's grandfather. He had built a company from scratch in Sapporo, expanding it into a major enterprise during his time. He was renowned as a successful businessman. But his reputation wasn't all positive. He was also known as a cold-hearted man, like ice. While he was undeniably talented in business, he approached everything with ruthless pragmatism, valuing profit above all else. This attitude extended even to Melissa's mother. From a young age, she was subjected to strict training, denied a normal childhood, and even her friends were chosen for her. Despite her efforts to win her father's approval, she was never acknowledged and always felt deeply lonely. Eventually, she rebelled by introducing her fiancé to the family. That fiancé was my father. Of course, her father disapproved of him, always making snide remarks. Still, because my father was her only child's chosen partner, her father begrudgingly gave him control over a subsidiary company. But this tentative peace was shattered when Melissa was born. The moment her grandfather learned she was a girl, he flew into a rage. At the very least, a grandson should be born to carry on the family name. Then, she started harassing the company by forcing the senior executives, who had been entrusted by my father, to either return to headquarters or be dismissed. The employees working at the company each have their own lives to support. However, at this rate, there was a risk that all employees could end up losing their jobs. Even though I was just a hired CEO, I had been entrusted with the company and its employees. They decided to divorce to protect the company and its workers. Your father left you and your mother, fully prepared never to see you again, in order to protect both of you. It was also part of the agreement he made with my grandfather. If he had secretly tried to see you, there was a real risk that the entire subsidiary could have been completely shut down. I see. My mother must have kept it from me so I wouldn't blame myself, thinking they divorced because of me being born. That's likely. I imagine, in her position, I'd do the same. How could a parent tell their child something like that? Yeah. But because of my misunderstanding, I made your middle school years miserable. I'm so sorry. Tears welled in Melissa's eyes as she bowed deeply again. But this wasn't about assigning blame to anyone. My father apologized to me too. He said he kept it from me because he didn't want me to be dragged into it. I remembered the pained look on my father's face when he finally told me the truth. His expression then mirrored Melissa's now, and for the first time, I realized how alike they were. Why hadn't I noticed it before? After the divorce, my father happened upon my mother's small diner, which was struggling at the time. The warm atmosphere and her kindness touched him, filling the emptiness in his heart. He started visiting regularly, and they slowly fell in love. At the time, my mother was running the diner alone after my biological father had passed away in an accident. My mother worked tirelessly every day in a rundown shop while raising me as a child. Moved by her dedication and perseverance, my father gradually fell in love with her, and the two of them eventually became a couple. He always said that leaving Melissa, his daughter, behind was something he deeply regretted. But now, all he could do was wish for his daughter's happiness. That's why he was genuinely overjoyed when he saw Melissa featured on the company's website as the CEO of the business he once ran. However, after hearing this story, my father shared one of his lingering concerns with me. It was whether his daughter was being harassed by my grandfather. Now that your mother is the chairwoman of the company, has your grandfather caused any trouble? He was worried he might still be meddling. Melissa took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and smiled a light, unburdened expression. No, thanks to my mother's hard work, the company is stable. My grandfather, well, we're not completely out of contact.
But he hasn't caused any problems.
Everything's fine now.
Her smile was calm and genuine, as if she had finally let go of the burden she'd been carrying.
Keith, I worked so hard at Tokyo University to support my mother. Even though I became the CEO, I still rely on her advice. It just shows I still have a long way to go.
But honestly, I'm fine now, so you don't need to worry.
She said with a smile that seemed like it belonged to a completely different person from before.
The intimidating Melissa I had known was gone, replaced by someone more genuine, perhaps her true self all along. With the burdens on both of us lifted, the conversation felt much lighter than before, almost like casual banter. So, Keith, you mentioned the diner reopened.
How's it doing? Thanks to your mother, it's doing great.
My mother told me she helped with the reopening.
Ah, so you heard about that too.
My parents' small diner had reopened in my mother's hometown, not in the city where they used to operate.
Melissa's mother's support had been instrumental in making it possible.
That was why I had been so eager to clear up the misunderstandings between us. Melissa's mother, after becoming the CEO and stabilizing the company, had finally managed to free herself from her father's oppressive influence. And after decades, she reached out to her ex-husband. Of course, it wasn't to rekindle their relationship but to apologize for what had happened back then. It was during that conversation that she learned her daughter and I had been classmates. When she visited my family's home, she bowed deeply to my mother and said,
"Thank you for accepting him into your life."
If he had been alone all this time, his heart might have broken. I'm truly grateful you became his partner. And I'm so sorry for what my daughter did to your son during middle school.
My father had told Melissa that the divorce was entirely his fault so she wouldn't blame herself.
But upon realizing how their choices had hurt their children, he deeply regretted not finding a better solution.
But my father believed that if he went to see her now, it might only make things worse between Melissa and me.
Thinking that way, and already determined to close his shop at the time, he decided to move to my mother's hometown. He thought that since their selfish actions had caused their daughter so much pain, putting distance between me and her would reduce the chances of any unpleasant feelings between us. It was apparently a decision the three of them made together.
However, Melissa's mother wasn't satisfied, saying it wouldn't count as a proper apology.
Because of that, the three of them continued to stay in contact. Eventually, her mother offered to help rebuild the shop by providing the necessary funds, as both an apology and a gesture of gratitude. Even so, my parents had no intention of returning to the city. Instead, they used the funds to reopen the diner in my mother's hometown.
Some of our regular customers even come all the way out here. My dad is thrilled about it.
That's why I'm so grateful to your mother. When I spoke, she still looked like she had more to say.
What's wrong?
I asked, and Melissa replied with her cheeks puffed out slightly.
But with your skills, you could aim so much higher. You went to Harvard, why this company? I wanted to work here as a way of saying thank you.
Sure, I had opportunities with top companies in Tokyo, but if I was going to work here,
it had to be this company. And honestly, thank you. Everyone in my family is happy now.
Really, why are you so kind?
Don't tell me you've forgotten everything I did to you. Shouldn't you hate me?
Your parents helped mine when we needed it most.
Besides, am I hired?
Of course you're hired.
And really? I'm so sorry for everything. And thank you,
she said, a single tear slipping down her cheek as she nodded. 1 year later, I successfully managed to get a job at Melissa's company. Now, I'm on the fast track to promotion and continue to achieve strong results in the sales department. Unlike the company in Tokyo, this one has many kind and supportive colleagues and senior staff, which makes it a very comfortable place to work. One day, as I was reviewing some documents in the conference room, there was a knock at the door, and Melissa peeked in. Good work, Ms. Nelson.
Good work? You don't have to call me Ms. Nelson right now. But you are the president. Fine.
Anyway, Keith, you've been such an asset to the company. As expected from a Harvard grad, she said, then quickly added, sorry.
That came out so condescending, it's a bad habit of mine. You're the boss, it's fine.
Hold your head high.
Blushing slightly, she sat across from me.
In the past year, I had noticed that beneath her polished exterior, she was often her own harshest critic.
Thank you.
I'll do my best.
That's the spirit.
Saying that, she fired herself up, and I patted her on the shoulder to cheer her on. Our relationship had been complicated, but now, we had opened our hearts to each other and could talk about anything. There would undoubtedly be many challenges ahead. But I was certain that, when the time came, we'd face them together by talking things through. Even though we weren't connected by blood, we were family.
I wonder if, someday, we could become a real family.
Lately, that thought had crossed my mind more often. But I hadn't shared it with her yet. I didn't feel like I was worthy of standing by her side just yet. But someday, hopefully in the near future, I wanted us to work hard together.
With that in mind, I decided to put even more effort into my job.